integrating PHP with MySQL. Now I've got my MAMP instance running on Windows 10 here, and you can see I've got the servers running in the background. I've got the Apache server and the MySQL server running, and I've downloaded the SQL file that's got some statements in there that will create my student table, and I've got the database file which has got our library of MySQL functions that we'll use later on. Let's deal with the SQL first. So if I open up the insert student SQL, this is a text file, and as you can see what it's got in it, it's got a bunch of lines that we can use to actually create a student table and insert some dummy records. So I'm just going to copy that and nip over to PHP and I'm going to go into the SQL tab and I'm going to paste those in there, and what this will do is this will if the student table already exists, it will just delete it. It will then create a student table with 3 fields and insert some dummy records into it. So if I click go, so do I really want to do that? I say yes. And now over here you can see I've got a student table created, and if I tap on that, here it is, and we've got some dummy rows in there. That's going to be useful for us for later on when we want to do some work. So back over here now, I've got an example file already created, and this example file is going to have some PHP in it. What we're going to do is we're going to insert, update and view records from that student table using SQL that's been embedded inside the PHP. Now what's important is to start off with an include statement, and what the include statement will do is it will load in the routines, the bits of PHP code that will enable us to access the database. So I just put that at the top, include database.php. And what comes next is a series of variables that we have to define that will enable the web server to connect to the database server. So the first one is going to be DB connection, like that, and I'm going to give that a value of localhost, and that's 3306. Now that's a specific value for MAMP running on Windows 10. And then we have to supply a username, so DB username, and the default is root. Now obviously in the real world you wouldn't use these usernames and passwords, you would change them, but this is just running on my own machine locally, so it doesn't really matter. And then DB password, and again that's going to be root, and the so now I've got a connection through from the web server to the database server. That's what the DB connection does. I need to authenticate, so I've had to supply a username and a password, but of course there could be many databases running on MAMP, so I actually have to supply the name of the database. That's going to be DB, and it's going to be database name, and in this instance mine is called student DB. Let me just check. You can see here it's called student DB. There it is, student DB. And those are the 4 pieces of information that are required to connect my web server to my database server when we're using PHP and MySQL. Now, if you're on a Mac, it looks slightly different if you're using MAMP. There's only a slight difference. It's the actual number that comes after this colon, the port code. So on a Mac, it's actually 8889 as opposed to 3306. So if you're using MAMP on a Mac or you're using MAMP on a PC, you actually just have to use a slightly different code. On a PC, the port number is 3306. On a Mac, it's 8889. But of course, there is another way for you to actually use this. You could be using the university web server, and here you actually have to supply different information. The name of the web server, Well, that's on the machine kunet.kingston.ac.uk. You'll have to supply your K number as your username. So that's line 6 there. And then you will have created a database password when you signed up and created that one database that you're allowed to use. So that database password goes into line 7. And then finally, on the university server, you're allowed to have one database, and that will have been automatically created for you. And it looks something like this, db_k, and then your K number. So again, you put that code in that gap to make it work. So you have to customize those 4 lines depending upon whether you're working locally, on a Mac or a PC, or whether you're going to use the university infrastructure. Anyway, I'm using MAMP here on my local machine. So these are the settings that will work for me. And this is obviously Windows 10, so it's going to be port number 3306. And so I've created the connection. Now what I want to do is I want to actually create some SQL. So I'm going to create a variable, and you can call this whatever you like, but I'm just going to call it SQL. And it's going to be a string. And inside here, we're going to place the appropriate SQL that we want to send to the MySQL server and actually have running at that end. So for example, let's do an insert statement. So it's going to be insert into student. So this is standard SQL. And we've got 3 fields. We've got KUID, we have last name, and we have money. Those are our 3 fields. Just to show you there, you can see them here. KUID, last name, and money. And then we go values. And again, in brackets, what we do is we have the 3 fields that we're actually going to insert in. Now, KUID is a string. I mean, I know it looks as if it's a number here, but it actually is in the structure of the table. It's a string. So this is going to be in quotes. And let's just make up a number like 500. So that's the ID number. And then a last name. And let's just call it any old name, Foster, for example. And then again, money. Now this is an integer, so this is a number that we can just type in like that. Now notice how I've used double quotes on the outside of the string, up here and here, and single quotes on the inside when we need to wrap these up. Now you can do it the other way around. I personally think it's actually quite easy. It's easier to put double quotes on the outside for reasons that we'll talk about later on. So there's my SQL string. So that's actual native SQL embedded in there. Now to actually run that and to send it off to the database, as you know, we've got these kind of wrapper functions that do all the hard work for us. So all we actually have to do is we go use database. And in there, we pass in the string, whatever string name we've got. Now, mine's called SQL, like that. And what will happen is that that will actually return a result. And so it will look like this, result. So, result is a variable, and it will contain the result of sending that SQL off to the database and running it against the table. Now all we need to do is we can actually print that result out. So I could go print $result, and I need to close my PHP block. Now I haven't embedded any of the HTML. Obviously, for this to be a proper page, you would have to have the HTML head and body and all that that markup in there. But just to keep things simple here, I'm just going to keep it so it just looks like this. So if I save that now, so let's just check. You can see here this is what the table looks like currently. Now over here, I've got the index of the web server. I brought it up. So if I click on example.php, what will happen is it will actually execute this PHP program. So let's try it out. And it says number of rows affected is 1. So what's happened is when we've called the use database function with our string, that's gone off, that string has been sent off as SQL to the database server. The database server has hopefully executed it, and has come back with a message saying one row has been affected. So it's returned a string, and what we've done is we've printed that string out. So let's go into the MySQL and have a quick peek and see what's happened. So if I come back into here, now I'm going to actually have to click refresh. So if I tap on student again, and you can see that Foster has actually been inserted into the database. So we could try some other things here. We could, so I'm just going to copy these lines. So I'm just going to comment that one out. We could try a delete statement. So I'm just going to delete all of that. Let's try and delete the row that we just inserted. So let's try and delete Foster. Now the syntax for a delete statement looks like this. We go delete from student, and it's important to put the where clause in because we don't want to delete everything. We could go where last name. You can see we can target a particular column here. Let's go where last name equals, we could go Foster, like that. Okay, so I can save that. I can run it again. It says number of rows affected is 1. Back over to here, bring the table up again, and the row with Foster in it has now been deleted, just like that. Okay, let's try some other things. So again, I'm going to copy that and paste it in, and I'm going to comment these out. So let's try an update statement. Okay, so we've done insert and delete. Let's try and update. Now the SQL syntax for update looks like this. We kind of go update student, and we use the reserved word set. And so let's give the person that we're talking about, let's give them loads of money. Let's give them £1,000, and let's go where. And again, let's go last name equals, let's just pick somebody. So let's pick web. So let's pick web, like that. Yep, 2 B's. And so I'm just going to save that. Back over to here, let's run it again. Number of rows affected is 1. So I'm going to bring the page up again, and if we watch what happens to web, hopefully the money figure will change. There it is. I set the web money to be 1,000. Straight. We've done insert and delete, and we've just done update. The final SQL statement to demonstrate would be select. So I'm just going to again copy these lines and comment those out. Now with the select statement, it's very straightforward. We just kind of go select star from, and the name of the table we're looking at is student. Now let's have a think about what's actually going on here. When we do an insert, a delete, or an update statement, what we're actually doing is we're making a change to the table. So we wouldn't necessarily expect to get very much back from the database apart from a message saying you've succeeded or you've failed. And in what this routine, this library does, is it just returns a string which says how many rows have been affected by the update. But things are a bit different when we run a select statement, because what we actually want to be returned is a table, a result set with lots and lots of records. We don't actually know how many rows we'll get back. Now, in the default way of doing this, lots of code is required to actually grab the rows, process the rows, manipulate the rows and print the rows out, or whatever it is that we want to do. But the use database function that we're going to be using here, it simply returns an HTML table with that table neatly formatted. So that's why we can simply go print result here. So when we use a select statement in SQL, use database will return a pre-formatted HTML table, which is quite nice. So let's try it out. I'm just going to save that. If I go back here, we go back to the example now, and I can click refresh, and here's my table. That's an HTML table, and you can see it's automatically pulled the column names out, structured it correctly using the table tags, the table rows, and the table data tags, just like that. So we could change this. We could say, for example, just show me, let's say we just wanted these two fields, KUID and last name. This works in exactly the same way you would expect, KUID and last name. So if I save that and click refresh, we just get those two particular columns. So when a select statement works, whatever the result will be that we get back, it will be pre-formatted into an HTML table. Now there's one other thing to demonstrate, which is what happens if our SQL is invalid. So for example, say I do something like this and forget to put a T in the select statement. If I now run this, we'll get an error message. Problem with query, check the SQL, and it reflects back the SQL that we've created in the first place. So if there is an issue with your SQL, hopefully you'll get a hint from here. One of the things you can always do, of course, is you can copy the SQL and then you can actually attempt to directly run it in the PHP MyAdmin interface and see what the actual error is. So you could actually just paste the SQL statement in there and run it and see what the error is, and sometimes that will help you as well.